I'm just back from Israel and would like to share a little bit about my time there. The Tel Aviv coastline reveals itself through the plane window as we prepare to land at Ben Gurion Airport. I'm here to escape the headlines and news stories which have been the lens through which I've viewed Israel since October 7th. I've longed to be here in these dark days to see and experience Israel myself through my own eyes, to be within the embrace of Israeli society. At the seemingly empty airport, I am greeted not by bustling human motion, but by pictures of the hostages. I imagine them. They are just an hour south of me. My first stop is Hostage Square at the heart of Tel Aviv, which is full of makeshift vigils. There are hundreds of connected empty picture frames, for example. There's a gigantic clock that counts the time the hostages have been in captivity. There are candles and signs and flowers. Nearby, a school group of young Orthodox girls sings Hannah Senesh's Eli Eli. When evening is near, I walk west on Gordon en route to the shore, but there's no escaping the hostages, the images of them and the vigils. They're everywhere, everywhere. In the windows of stores, on street benches that line Dizengoff, on signs plastered to buildings. The hostages' heart-rending absence is the thrum of daily life in Israel. At the beach, my gaze lingers on the darkening skyline, and I glance south toward the ancient port of Jaffa, and I think about Gaza, of the souls there who are also witnessing the sun's final bow. I'm not so sure that Israelis are thinking the same thing as I am. Machzirim otam habayta akshav, bring them home now, is what the sign says. The next day is Shabbat, and I see Nani's aunt, Ruthie. Nani's my wife. I see Nani's aunt, Ruthie, along with 3 of her 4 children, Nani's cousins, Alon, Avital, and Boaz. And the occasion is particularly meaningful as it marks a reunion. Until today, Alon has been stationed in Gaza, separated from his 2 young children, Eitan and Goni. I have a lot of questions for Alon. Now, Alon's been to Gaza before. First, he was there when he was doing his mandatory military service in the early 2000s. At that time, he was one of the 24,000 Israeli soldiers who were there to protect roughly 8,000 Israeli settlers. Math didn't quite work out. So he returned in 2005 as part of Israel's withdrawal from Gaza and the removal of all Israeli settlements under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. At that time, Alon found himself tasked with physically removing the settlers from their homes, which he did with tears in his eyes. Alon was reactivated a 3rd time in 2014 amidst frequent rocket barrages from Gaza, which posed a constant threat to Israelis living on the Gaza border. In that year of 2014, Alon spent a month stationed in a tank in Gaza. Now, throughout all of this, Alon, who's just a few years younger than I am, he finished school, he lived his life, he started a career, he got married, he had kids. But Gaza persisted as an undeniable reality in his life. After dinner, I snap a quick selfie, or I think it's called an ussie, and head home. Saturday, a strange Shabbat for me. I catch a 6 a.m. bus to a moshav, which is a farming collective, and the moshav that I'm at is called Pri Gan, which is along the Gaza border, almost as far south as Egypt. I am with other Israelis and people like me who've come to Israel in solidarity. We are here to pick tomatoes. On October 7th, Pri Gan was one of the many communities attacked by Hamas terrorists, but it was fortunate because a group of 5 Israelis bravely defended the moshav, saving so many lives before being killed by Hamas terrorists. The 5 people from the town of Shlomit who drove to Pri Gan and defended the moshav, their names were Avi Zidon, Oriel Bibi, Bechor Suid, Aviad Gad Cohen, and Reuven Shish Portish. In the ensuing days, 37 of Pri Gan's 50 Thai workers returned to Thailand. And since then, the moshav has relied on volunteers to harvest their crops. And every single day, Israeli school children or families or just individuals or groups brought by organizations like Achim B'Neshek or Leket Israel, the group that brought me, come to help at Pri Gan. We start picking, and it's not long before we hear the distant cadence of machine gun and artillery fire coming from Gaza, which is just 3 miles away. A seasoned volunteer tells me, "Don't worry, that's us," by which he meant it's the IDF. While I feel assured of my safety, a sense of sadness lingers, acknowledging the deeper implications these sounds hold. Again, I look around and I'm not sure the Israelis I'm with are thinking the same thing as me. Hours later, our bodies sore and clothes dirtied. It's hard work. The tomatoes hang kind of at the bottom and you're kind of on your knees the whole time or bending over. We finish picking and a table is set with baked goods and salads. Of course, the moshav takes good care of all of the volunteers that come down. We eat, we board the bus, and we drive north toward Tel Aviv. Along the way, we pass the site of the Re'im Music Festival massacre. We pass Kibbutz Be'ari, Nachal Oz, and Kfar Aza. Now, these are ghost towns. They're residents, refugees. And I think, as has been the question, will these people return home? And I wonder, how could they not? And I also wonder, they must. Havdalah. Back in Tel Aviv, I attend a rally at Hostage Square with thousands of other people, as has been happening every Saturday night in Tel Aviv since the war began. Together, we listen to pleading pain speeches by family members of those held hostage. The crowd chants, Bechirot, Akshav, Bechirot, Akshav, elections now, elections now. And the anger and frustration at Netanyahu and his government is palpable. Here, there are layers upon layers of complexity because they're saying, bring them home now. And they're saying, elections now. And in the very same breath, destroy Hamas. How can they hold each of these ideas simultaneously? And also, how could they not? Early the next morning, I returned to the Gaza border, this time to a moshav called Pa'amei Tashaz. And there, I meet Smadar, who raised her children here, whose husband's family has been here for generations. Cigarette in hand, she shows us with the practiced grace the proper way to pull a clementine from a tree. Smadar embodies the kind of Israeli that I just so admire. Resolute, straightforward, perhaps blunt, yet warm and affectionate. The air is thick with the pleasant aroma of citrus blossom. Before the war, Smadar employed 25 Gazans. This place had no Thai workers. And the 25 Gazans who were there were there because of the 18,000 work permits issued by the Israeli government in recent years for Palestinians to work within Israel. I asked Madar, maybe naively, will you rehire them one day? She can't really even understand the question, and then quietly shakes her head, disheartened. How could I? She says with a disbelieving smile. The trust is gone. Monday, I board the train bound for Jerusalem to visit a former teacher, now a cherished friend. He is on the left, the Israeli left, a Meretz member of which very small party today in Israel. And for this reason, because he's a man of the left, I'm particularly interested to hear his insights. After telling me of the seemingly endless funerals he and his children have attended over the last 3 months, and what it's been like for them, he tells me, almost sheepishly, that he thinks that now is the time for Jews to turn inward. And it takes me a minute for this thought to compute, because at Micah, I'm so used to the language of turning outward, of reaching beyond our own community. Turn inward? He shares with me a poem that he says he's been reading since October 7th. It's a poem translated from the Yiddish, and the poem is called Good Night, Wide World. It was written by a Polish-born poet named Jacob Glasstein in April 1938. Note the year, April 1938. I'm just going to read a little excerpt from this poem. Good night, wide world, great stinking world. With the yellow patch burning with proud stride, I decide I am going back to the ghetto. To my worn-out Gemaras, to arduous Talmudic debates, to lucent exegetic Yiddish, to rabbinical law, to deep, deep meaning, to duty, to what is right. World, I walk with joy to the quiet ghetto light. Good night. It's all yours, world. I disown my liberation. Within me weeps the joy of coming home. Again, I pause. What Jacob Glasstein says, or when he says, I am going back to the ghetto, what he's doing is he's rejecting the world that gave birth to Enlightenment Judaism, which is our Judaism, a Judaism wherein you can be part of the wider world as a Jew. But Glasstein was onto something. 1938. The Jewish Enlightenment in Europe, which aimed to modernize Jewish life by promoting secular education, assimilation, and integration into wider society, it failed. A year after Glasstein wrote, I'm going back to the ghetto, Germany invaded Poland, and within 7 years, 90% of the Jewish population of Poland would be dead. Maybe the Jews should have turned inward. Just the idea that Glasstein had. I'm done with the wider world. But in America and in Israel, our response to the destruction in Europe was not to turn inward. In keeping with Herzl's original vision of what Zionism is, the state of Israel was established for the sake of the Jews, albeit with a universalist message. This is why when Herzl names his weekly paper that he established, it was called, I can't pronounce the German, Die Welt. He called it the world. Because Zionism wasn't a project for the Jews alone. Zionism was a project for the world. He thought of Zionism in larger terms. And in America too, we celebrate our lives as American Jews, as people of the wider world. We uphold Hillel's famous words that a thriving existence depends on turning outward. And yet, in this crucial moment, my friend's message aligns with the stark reality I witness in Israel. The nation cannot turn its gaze outward, not now. Not now. Not now as they endure the ongoing grief over the loved ones slain on October 7th and since. Not now as their family members are still hostages in Gaza. Not now when everybody in Israel can tell you the name of Kfir Bibas, the baby who turned 1 recently, and every Israeli knows his name. Not now as their children are still serving in active combat in the army. All of these realities grip the hearts of the people of Israel, and it consumes them. All this while they grapple with the continued brutality inflicted by their neighbors, Hamas, who still declare their intentions. We're coming for you again. Israelis have always exemplified the resilience of the Jewish people, I think. And perhaps that resilience comes in part from knowing when to turn inward. Can we criticize them for this? I don't think so. Perhaps we can take a cue from them, and faced with the shocking anti-Semitism from even those we thought were our friends, embrace introspection ourselves. This doesn't imply abandoning the endeavor of turning outward. Far from it. Similar to the pandemic, when we confined ourselves at home for a year, this didn't signify a permanent state. There's a moment for reaching out, but there's equally a moment for family and standing with our own. The next day, I prepare to leave the cocoon of the Jewish state back to the wide world, great stinking world, as Glassstein says. Soon I'll reorient my gaze, because we can never disown our liberation, as Glassstein says. Such is the mission of the Jewish people, to, even in exile, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit. But for now, my comfort comes from within. Shabbat Shalom.